Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's not like you're busy or anything. You're suing the SEC, so I figured...
Among other things, yeah.
How's that case going? It's with the Third Circuit. What's going on?
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for asking. We are in active litigation with the SEC, and a lot of the conversation tends to focus on the SEC enforcement case against Coinbase. We are, of course, one of many enforcement cases the SEC has brought, I think, erroneously and contrary to law, but brought nonetheless. And yet we have our own case, as you mentioned, against the SEC. It's going very well. Last week we had oral arguments before the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a watershed moment for crypto and the industry as a whole, and not just for Coinbase, in that for the first time a federal appellate court was really called upon to evaluate and frankly judge the SEC's refusal to issue normal, balanced rules for crypto. And we're waiting for the court's decision. It will likely take several months, but we were very pleased with how the arguments went, and cautiously optimistic that we're gonna see that case go our way.
So it'll take a couple months minimum, the decision to come out.
Yeah. Conventional wisdom is anywhere between 3 and 9 months, something like that. Yeah.
If you win, what happens after that?
Well, I prefer to think about it as when we win, but if we win, to take your question seriously, as I always try to do, what will happen is that the court will have determined that the SEC's refusal to issue rules for crypto, rules that we requested in a petition that we filed nearly 2 years ago, or maybe now over 2 years ago, that decision was arbitrary, capricious. And we hear the arbitrary, capricious phrase thrown out a lot when we're talking about the SEC and its actions against the crypto industry. But in the law, that has a very specific and significant meaning, because what it basically means is the SEC violated the law when they refused to engage in rulemaking and needs to be held to account for that. So I would expect that if the court were to rule in that way, we would see it follow on orders to begin rulemaking, or to otherwise address why they turned us away and turned all of us down when they denied that petition. That's ultimately up for the court to decide.
Sure. So, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about a recent hire that you guys made. You just hired Ryan Van Grack, former general counsel of Citadel Securities. But before he was at Citadel, he was at the SEC, where he led the FinTech working group and handled all their crypto stuff. What does Ryan's acquisition for Coinbase mean for your legal strategy?
Well, I'm very excited that Ryan decided to join us to run litigation day-to-day for the company. As the chief legal officer of Coinbase, I get to wear a number of different hats. And one of the hats that I wear that I focus on a lot is continuing to attract the best and brightest to the team. And certainly in bringing Ryan on board, I think I met that standard and then some. As you mentioned, he has deep expertise coming not just from the SEC, but as the former general counsel of Citadel Securities. He also spent time in the Obama White House. He knows Washington well. He knows the courtroom well. And I think it's very much in line with, and certainly consistent with, something we've always said when it comes to addressing the threat that the SEC poses to crypto, which is we think the answer to sensible rules for crypto lies in regulation and in legislation passed by Congress. But if the SEC wants to meet us in court and drag this company and this industry through an unnecessary court process, we're prepared to do that. And I think Ryan's hire only underscores that commitment.
We'll talk about Congress in a second, but I want to talk about, as we talk about a court decision and then the time it takes on top of that to come up with rulemaking when you win, what are you supposed to do in the meantime? Well, what does Coinbase do? What does the industry as a whole do while we wait for regulation?
Well, I think we first and foremost continue to build great products and services that will ultimately draw the next billion people into crypto. And that's obviously at the heart of Coinbase's mission, but I think it's the responsibility and mission of the crypto community as a whole. Now, the SEC's regulation by enforcement approach, it's strange, even odd preference for lawsuits over legislation makes that harder for sure. And I think puts the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage when you look at what's happening right now in Europe. But we must and will persevere. And although it may be harder and take longer than any of us would like. We've seen now tens of millions of Americans make clear they want to see crypto in their financial future. They want to see crypto innovation protected. It's an important technology. If one part of one administration is making that harder than any of us would like, we can't allow ourselves to be held back and held hostage by that misguided approach. We have to persevere.
So how has regulation by enforcement impacted Coinbase? And I mean, I think that you guys, in the general scheme of things, are doing pretty well. But it's obviously been expensive and frustrating. But for some companies, it's pushed them out of business entirely. What's that been like?
Well, Coinbase is very fortunate that we have the resources and the leadership that allow us to stay the course and defend not just our company in one or more lawsuits, but the industry as a whole, and to push for sensible rules from the SEC, and to push Congress to pass legislation, whether it's the market structure bill that made its way through the House with bipartisan support this past summer, or legislation on stablecoins. We have resources and a capacity to manage that in a way that we're very fortunate to be able to do. The cost for others, though, is massive, and I suspect many in this room and many watching this can speak very personally to the economic cost of this scorched earth litigation approach by the SEC, the psychological costs that come from receiving a knock on the door in the middle of the night or a subpoena in the mail. These impact real builders in this community in real ways. And I think sometimes that gets lost when we talk about court dockets and legislative packages. This is about protecting real people from the overreach of the SEC, and at the same time, leading all of us through that to a place on the other side where, we can come to events like this one and talk much more about the future and the technology we want to build rather than hearing from lawyers like me.
So I think if Gary Gensler were here to defend himself, he would say that his agency is taking these steps not to punish the industry or to punish Coinbase, but to protect investors. And obviously, we should be protecting investors, and there are bad actors in crypto. What do you think the appropriate balance is, when you consider innovation versus customer protection? Well,
it's absolutely critical that we protect investors even as we promote the innovation of crypto. But I ask all of you in this room and those of you who may be watching elsewhere, as investors in this space, do you feel protected by Gary Gensler? Seriously, who wants to raise a hand and stand up behind that proposition? It's preposterous. And if it weren't immediately obvious from the fact that 0 people in this room just raised their hands in support of that approach, you could look to the fact that 52 million Americans have now bought or sold a digital asset, give or take. The Federal Reserve and other independent agencies have validated that scale of participation in this industry. And particularly in an election year, where I think all of us expect things to be very, very close, the crypto voter is going to matter, and elected officials and others need to pay attention to that. So I'm still waiting to meet members of the anti-crypto army. If you're out there, if you're here, come up to me afterwards. I'd love to buy you a coffee and talk things out. But instead, what I see are many thousands, indeed, 1.5 million Americans who have now signed up as crypto advocates with Stand With Crypto, saying, we'll take the other side of that bet. We'll stand on the other side of that effort, and we're going to vote and participate in the election in November accordingly in ways that I think are going to take people by surprise.
We'll also get to the crypto voter later. But, okay, so we're talking about the SEC. I think a lot of people in the industry focus on what the regulators are doing, what the regulators are not doing. I think Congress gets a free pass sometimes. They have not really accomplished much, right? FIT 21 was a good try, but nothing's really come to fruition. Where does Congress factor into all of this, and kind of what is your timeline for actual crypto legislation and not stablecoin legislation, which feels like low-hanging fruit?
Well, Congress needs to do more for sure. And the fact of the matter is we are years behind where we should be when it comes to sensible legislation, whether it's for straightforward rules on market structure, stablecoins, or whatever the case may be. But I actually want to maybe slightly challenge the idea that they have done nothing. The fact of the matter is 71 Democrats joined a gaggle of Republicans in passing FIT 21, the market structure bill, in the House. We're now seeing Democrats in the Senate take up the charge alongside of their Republican colleagues in the Senate Agriculture Committee and elsewhere. And so I think we're seeing progress in that regard. And I think that's being reflected in the increased dialogue and focus, frankly, on crypto in the presidential race. I know for many in the community, it can be frustrating that we're not getting the specifics and the detail we want to see from the presidential campaigns. However, we're seeing both candidates now speak specifically about protecting the innovation of crypto and to varying degrees offering detailed proposals on how to do that. So I'm actually kind of optimistic that between the pressure coming from the increased focus in the presidential race and the fact that we're going to have a very intensely fought race for control of the House and the Senate come November, that our elected leaders are going to pay attention and have to pay attention to the crypto voter if they want to come back and lead come January.
But you don't think anything's going to happen until after the election?
I actually think things could happen in the lame duck section after the election and before a new administration takes office in January. And I'm optimistic about that because we've now heard multiple leaders in the House and Senate explicitly raise the prospect of legislation passing in the lame duck, legislation which could address either market structure, stable coins, both, or something else even bigger than that. I think that's something worth paying attention to. And look, it's going to take a lot of work for us all, those of us pushing for sensible rules, but we've got millions of Americans counting on us to do that work. And so I think it's absolutely within the realm of possibility.
Well, it's nice to hear that you're so optimistic.
I have to be optimistic in this job or else I go crazy.
Well, good. You are. Not crazy, optimistic. And Coinbase also as a company is very optimistic, it seems, about this election because you guys are spending a lot of money on this election. You guys have donated $50 million to the Fair Shake Pro Crypto Super PAC. And I'm curious to know why. What do you hope that will gain?
Well, the way that super PACs in general work is that they operate independently and take contributions from a range of sources. Coinbase is certainly among them, and we are maybe among the more prominent supporters of Fair Shake. But they ultimately make their own decisions about what races to participate in and at what levels to support individual candidates. Coinbase thinks it's critical to be a part of that conversation. None of us like the fact that there's way too much money in American politics, certainly in the races for Congress and in the race for president. And yet, that's the way our system operates, whether you like it or not. And so, as a purist, I would love to be able to say we're not going to further contribute to the coarsening and the dialogue in our elections and the money that's involved in so many of these races. But we don't have the luxury of being purists at a time when this industry and this community is under fire and under siege by an administration led by Gary Gensler that basically wants to see crypto driven into the shadows. Well, we're not going to be driven into the shadows. And to make lasting change, it's not just enough to win individual court cases. We need to elect a Congress and elect a president that understands that the American people want to see crypto in their future. And to do that, we need to support organizations that are designed to make that happen. And that's really why we've chosen to be involved in such a significant way.
Have you been happy with their results so far?
Well, results are still pending. What's going to make me happy and make Coinbase happy is if we elect a pro-crypto Congress come November and an administration that takes office in January that is committed to balancing investor protections with the need to promote innovation. Coinbase has always taken the position that whether you're Democrat or Republican, whether you're left-leaning or right-leaning, being pro-crypto is being pro-investor and ultimately pro-American. And so that's why, through our various efforts, we've been pleased to see people across the spectrum supported when they not only voice support for crypto, but take specific actions that make it clear that we're not going to be living with lawsuits for the next 5, 10, or 50 years in crypto. This campaign that Mr. Gensler has unleashed will come to an end, one way or the other, and our elected leaders will get our support if they commit to that.
So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to circle back to the crypto voter. Does such a thing really exist?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Stand with crypto. I mentioned earlier that we now have 1.5 million advocates who have signed up with Stand With Crypto in a way that was unimaginable just a few months ago. And here's the other thing. The presidential election is almost certainly likely to be decided in a handful of states. We all know that. And if you look at those so-called swing states, you'll see that the margin of victory in the last election and even the election before that, the number of voters who elected either Donald Trump or Joe Biden as our last presidents, those numbers are dwarfed by the number of people who have said they want to vote on crypto as one of their most important issues. And they're absolutely dwarfed by the number of voters who have owned crypto and said they will absolutely take into account a candidate's crypto positions before casting their ballot. So even if millions of people are not single issue voters on crypto, enough of them care enough about crypto in these close races in these particular swing states that you're absolutely going to see the crypto voter make a difference in November. And that's why we're seeing so much attention being paid to crypto by all of these candidates, even as there are other very important issues that our country faces.
So can you tell me a little more about Stand With Crypto and what Coinbase is doing with that?
Well, Stand With Crypto is also a separate organization. Coinbase supports the efforts that Stand With Crypto has made in order to activate the crypto voter. Its real focus is on encouraging crypto owners to lend their voices in this election and season and to this electoral process. Look, the stereotypical image of the crypto owner or participant, right, is a certain guy of a certain background of a certain age. Here's the reality, and Stand With Crypto has made, I think, this very clear as part of its outreach efforts. More than half of crypto owners who are engaged in this movement are under the age of 40. We see that more than half of them, almost half of them at least, are not white. 20% of crypto owners in the country today, 20% are women with children. You would never know that if you listen to the sort of stereotypical presentations of who the crypto voter is and who the crypto community reflects. Stand With Crypto, I think, is showing that through grassroots and on-the-ground efforts to bring crypto voters IRL and to show up and show their strength in events all across the country. And we think that elections are going to stand or fall based on those efforts and that candidates are paying careful attention to that. So I applaud their efforts. We support what they're doing. And it's also important, I think, just to underscore as well, Cheyenne, that Stand With Crypto is not just about November. This is a movement that is built to last. I think you're going to see efforts continue on into 2025 and beyond based on the success that we've had so far.
So we've talked a lot about lobbying, obviously. I want to talk about lobbying, Freudian slip. We've talked a lot about, the PAC, and I'm curious where lobbying fits into Coinbase's strategy. It's an election year. Obviously, that's where fair shake comes in. But, what about good old lobbying?
The way to think about how all these different pieces fit together is to understand that, you have different tools in your toolbox and your kit to achieve different objectives. PACs and super PACs tend to focus on races and either supporting or confronting the efforts of individual candidates to win particular offices. C4s are really about motivating voters to participate in the electoral process. Individual companies and organizations can focus on encouraging our elected officials to pass legislation, and that's certainly been the approach of Coinbase. We want to see the market structure bill work its way through the Senate and get signed by the president by the year end. We're focused on that, for example, at Coinbase. We think stablecoin legislation should pass this year, and we're focused on that as well. But these other efforts from other organizations are critically important because they draw attention to these issues in ways we think will motivate our elected officials to take action and to move beyond just offering platitudes and nice words of comfort to those of us who need action now.
All right, we have 30 seconds left. If we're talking at Mainnet next year, after the election, after you've won your case against the SEC, what are we going to be talking about? What do you think will be different?
Well, I genuinely meant what I said earlier. I hope we get to a time sooner rather than later when the lawyers in crypto are the least interesting people in the audience or in the crowd, right? you don't need to hear from us for the foreseeable future. I do think we're going to likely see legislation move forward. I think the court cases are going to persist because, unfortunately, court litigation takes longer than many of us would like. But there is going to come a day, and I hope that day is soon, when the technology and the community is once again put at the center of this conversation, and lawyers like me are just hanging out in the back sipping our coffee.
All right. I love the optimism.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.